Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply.
Tape Deck Media.
Hi there, I am Kelly Zonikas, and I am the host of a brand new podcast called Holler and Wine. I'm a stand-up comedian, I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I genuinely love talking to people. And despite the fact that I do not care for the sound of my own voice, I've got a podcast now. So please come join us. We're going to have really good conversations. We're going to talk about cocktails, and I am going to give my guests a tarot card reading because why not? So join us on Holler and Wine. Hope to see you soon. Well, it's a podcast, so it's hear you soon? That sounds weird.
Ruddle me this, ruddle me that. We got the riddles that'll make you chat. Oh yeah, baseline stuff with groove is tight. Get your funk on, we're rocking tonight. One more time.
Good morning, Ruddle Maniacs. Happy Monday to you. We are back for another episode of Ruddle Me This. As always, I am your faithful host, Taylor Ruddle. Today's episode is going to be another entry in our little mini-series that Geoff and I have started calling The Cost of Greatness. If you've been listening for a while, you might recognize that from episode 77, where Geoff and I broke down The Menu, a 2022 movie about a chef. Well, it's more than just a chef, but that's the gist of it. It's about a chef who's devoted to greatness and what is the cost. And so today we decided to sit down and talk about the movie Whiplash. Now, I think I maybe talk about this a little bit in the interview, but I had always gotten confused with the movie Whiplash with the movie Whip It, which is a movie about roller derby. And so I never watched Whiplash because I wasn't that interested in a movie about roller derby. But when I found out it was actually about this kind of running theme that we've been discussing on the podcast about the cost of greatness, and it was actually about a jazz musician and, J.K. Simmons, the sort of antagonist of the movie. He's just incredible in everything he does. So I thought, yep, let's give it a go. And I ended up really, really enjoying the movie. It's definitely, I see why it's been lauded so much as a great movie. So I thought, yes, let's bring Geoff on and let's do another entry of The Cost of Greatness. I have another movie that we could possibly look at in the future. I'm thinking maybe looking at The Wrestler with Mickey Rourke. That would be another cost of greatness. But for now, yes, the Whiplash, not The Menu. Now, we recorded this several weeks ago, and I believe at the time we talked about Geoff not entirely being sure about what all of his new social media tags were going to be. We have an update. They'll all be updated and current in the show notes, but from now on, you can find Geoff's blog at geoffwilsonhcd.com. Again, link in the show notes, and he is on Instagram and TikTok as G. Wilson's Work. So whatever we talk about in the recorded interview, just ignore that. Those are his correct social media tags. No real plugs to get in this week, although if you are going to be in Rangiora, you could come out and on the 7th of February, you could come out and enjoy the Beats by Bingo, some musical bingo there. Other than that, not a whole lot to plug. Have some possible gigs for the 21st and 22nd of February, but as of this stage, they are still in the planning stages, so nothing to report there. Alrighty, let's get the show on the road. Ruddle Maniacs, please warmly welcome to the show, Geoff Wilson. Welcome, Geoff, back to the podcast for another edition of a little mini-series I believe we're going to be calling The Cost of Greatness. to discuss a movie that we both have seen. I saw for the first time recently. That movie is Whiplash. When was the first time you saw the movie?
I think it was probably during COVID around that time. My wife loves it. She's talked about it a long time. And as luck would have it, it's one of those things when I went to rent it a few years ago, it was on YouTube, but they only had the buy option. So coming back for this show, it's like, oh, I actually already bought the movie, which is kind of
Hell
nice.
yeah.
So I got to rewatch it again. I loved it
Awesome.
way more the second time, by the way. Like just
Interesting.
I already was like, I could easily never see that again. I loved it so much more the second time.
Yeah, it's one of those movies where I suspect we were just off camera talking about that extra 80% or 1%, whatever it was that were talking about camera setups. And I feel like this movie is one of those movies that it's hard to know exactly why it's so well made, but I imagine it's because it's just so tight in terms of the writing and the shooting, and I don't know any other cinematography terms, but it just seems like it's very, like, there's not a lot of fat on the movie.
Well, I think also the biggest part about it and why we love stories is the characters, right? Like there's not set pieces. There's like 3 places in the entire movie. There's like a cafe for a brief minute. There's his dorm room and like the studio. And I guess like 1 or 2 performance halls. That's it. Like there's not a lot of set. You're not like watching him walk around the city too much. It's the characters. It's watching the emotional journey, watching the changes, seeing if both the main 2 characters will actually change.
Something interesting about that someone else told me. This is potentially another movie we could do in this series, but have you seen the movie called Rush? It's a like a
Nope.
Formula One. I don't know car racing, but it's a car racing movie.
If it's Formula One, I've got Formula One stuff like all over the place near me right now. So
Okay.
that I will need to see, but Rush, no, I have not.
So it is, I don't know if it's Formula One, but it's some kind of fast cars, and it's got Chris Hemsworth and the dude who plays the sniper in Inglourious Bastards. I think he's also
Okay.
he's somebody in the Marvel universe as well, but Frederick Zoller, that's what he's called in in Inglourious Bastards. But so those 2 are like rival racers in some kind of, people that watch wrestling are going to be yelling at the podcast now, but they're racing in some kind of cars. And what's fascinating about that movie is they didn't think they were going to get a big budget when they were writing it. So they made sure that all of the scenes were very character driven and the dialogue was snappy and onto it and everything. So then what happened was when they got funding and they could film all the big race scenes that they didn't think they were going to be able to film, it was kind of like nitrous oxide into the gas line, and that the movie was already super solid just from a dialogue and character point, that adding in all these racing scenes was just like that extra little cherry on the top. So yeah, interesting little tidbit that I heard years ago, probably 10 years ago now at this point. A guy I used to deliver pizzas with told me that, and finally get to regurgitate it here.
I realized also, have we explained what Whiplash is? We're already like fanboying over it immediately, and then it's like side movies. I don't think we've even said it's a drumming movie.
Okay, so do you want to tell the audience? I mean, I'm guessing if they clicked on
It's a
it, they at
drumming
least
movie.
know. Here's the thing: is like, I never watched this for years because I got mixed up and getting confused as to what this movie was about because of the actors that are in it. So, J.K. Simmons is the band teacher, whatever he is, the conductor, and so now Elliot Page was in Juno with J.K. Simmons, and then Elliot Page many years ago did a movie called Whip It, which was a roller derby movie. And because this movie is called Whiplash and that movie's called Whip It, and J.K. Simmons is in both of them, or is in 2 of them, and Elliot Page is in 2 of them, I thought Whip It and Whiplash were the same movie. And I thought, I don't know if I'm that interested in watching a roller derby movie.
And all I can think it is, this is J. Jonah Jameson, Spider-Man's boss,
yes.
and this is the
I
wrong
love
universe.
him. Yeah, I love him as Jonah Jameson so much. But yeah, so it's a drumming movie, but you want to expound on that? What is the movie about?
So without planning how to summarize the movie and waffling right now before actually describing what it is to see how long I can go not describing the movie about drumming. It is basically a kid entering a music college. And I guess it's set it up. He's just playing by himself. He's trying to get good. This teacher comes in and sees him. And essentially it's kind of his journey through trying to make this teacher, J.K. Simmons, adore him, like give him opportunities, thinking that he's the savior, that he's the only way to get famous, and changing dramatically based on almost abuse, essentially. And will he come out of it the same person? Will he succeed or not? Like, that's essentially it. It's watching his moral fiber, if you will, change.
Yeah. And so that will end the non-spoiler discussion.
Yeah.
From now on, it's going to be all spoilers. So if you haven't watched it, I actually do reckon go and watch it. Unless you're like me and you can listen to people talking about a movie and then go and watch it, or read the Wikipedia summary. In that case, listen on.
Well, I mean, that's half the movies. Like, half the movies I see, I don't actually see. It's like I walk into the room, my wife is watching something, and I go, "Hey, what's that?" I don't actually feel like watching that, but let me go on
Yeah.
IMDb immediately. I'll walk around and I'll read the entire. Oh, that's the movie, and then we can talk about it.
Yeah. I have this real specific habit of sometimes I'll be watching a movie and then sitting with my phone with the Wikipedia page and just reading ahead slightly. What's wrong with me?
I do it too. Well, it's because
That's
I think what
yeah.
it is when you, or at least for me, it's when you don't quite know if you want to finish this thing, but then yeah, like you read
Yeah.
one line too far, and it's the big like twist, and you're like, well,
Yeah. I did it to myself again. So the I guess the way you would look at this movie, hang on, I was going to skip to the ending, but this, so like you say, the abusive treatment by what is he? He's called Fletcher in the movie, isn't he? So
he's got Clarence Fletcher, just Fletcher.
Clarence Fletcher, yeah, and the kid is
Or
Andrew
Terrence.
Nyman.
I don't know. Let's just call him Fletcher, because God knows if we haven't looked up. We're not a movie podcast, so we haven't looked up
Yeah,
character names.
yeah. So the kid is Nyman, played by Miles Teller,
Miles Teller,
who
yeah.
is the class. He's almost like the Jennifer Lawrence of coming of age movies. I think I saw him in another movie called The Spectacular Now, in which he plays a similar kind of well-meaning, but a little bit makes the wrong decisions a lot, kind of young man character.
And I guess just for setting too, like it feels like he's kind of a Midwesty kind of character. In the States, this will make sense, but he's in New York City, so like hard, gritty. At least I think it's New York. It
It
feels
is
like
New York, yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, it kind of feels like not city kid in the city. There's all these like tough people around. People that are really aggro, if you will. And so he starts out very gentle and apologetic.
Oh, really? I didn't. Probably because I don't have quite as nuanced a view of the States, but I thought he was from New York, but now that you mention it, he does feel like Midwest kid has just moved to the big city. Yeah.
Because I mean, his dad, his dad, I guess, lives nearby and stuff, and so maybe it's just, I don't know, something about his. It's the appearance to me. It's some of the mannerisms, and yeah, this is me culturally just picking up on those tiny little things. But it's, to me, it's, you could see at least his character in the very opening scene. It's, he's playing by himself, so so he's got passion. He's not waiting for somebody else, and then this teacher walks in and he stops immediately and he starts apologizing, and the teacher basically, Fletcher, immediately is like twisting his thing, like, well, why did you stop? Okay, I'll start playing again. And then he starts playing. He's like, well, did I ask you to start playing? Oh God, I'm sorry. He stops again. So
Yeah.
it's like very that apologetic. Like, I think if you're in New York, if he was a New York character from the start, it feels like it would almost be already aggressive.
Yeah,
And so
that's
true.
true.
Like there's this innocence that he has at the very start of it.
That's right. And I have always wondered about what that scene was about, because, like you say, the kid, he obviously wants to believe that he's kind of special, and I think which it's done quite well, because the whole idea of this character is that he plays big band jazz, which is a collective thing. You have to be a cog in a machine to be in a big band jazz band, but he also wants so badly to be special, and he wants so badly to be like one of the greatest drummers who ever lived. And I find that so fascinating, in that, like, is it one of those Sisyphean tasks where by the very nature of what he does, trying to stand out is almost kind of like impossible. Not impossible, but it's going to ruin the art form that he's contributing to.
Well, because I realized actually, in you saying that, I actually start, as I just rewatched again the last 10 minutes of this right before coming on, just because it's uplifting. I was wondering, did he actually ever want to be great, or was he starting it because he loved that and he just went to college to do it? That's why, spoilers again, he got a girlfriend that he left later. Or did Fletcher put the idea of greatness in him? So it's like, whose
Mm,
goal was he actually going for? Was it his goal to be great, or was it so much of Fletcher saying, I can make you great? And then like burning that idea, kind of like what I look at this a lot of as is like that analogy of like the sports dad who's like, I couldn't make it in the NFL or the rugby team, the All Blacks. So I'm going to I'm going to take my kid to practice. And even if he's crying on the field, no, you got to do drills because I want you to be great. Or it's the what is it, pageant mom or whatever you call them. Like there was reality shows about that 20 years ago,
mhm.
like pageant moms where they were once cheerleaders and they couldn't make it, so they're forcing their kid to like live their dream. And that's why I
Yes.
wonder, did Andrew actually have this dream?
That is an interesting question, isn't it? I also wonder if uh you know how we've said this before, but there are comedians who think they want to be a full-time
Mm,
comedian, but they don't actually realize what that takes, what kind of work goes into doing it. Like, people treating it like a hobby, expecting to turn it into a career.
same as running shows, right? The exact same thing. Oh yeah,
Yes.
I'll be known for making all the shows and or
Yeah.
putting something in a fest or whatever it is, and
Yeah,
then
and not
yeah,
specifically just comedy. Yeah, I should have broadened that, but like people who they want to turn their creative thing into a career, but they're only treating it like a hobby. And so perhaps as Nyman, he has this idea in his head that, yeah, I want to be one of the greats. I want to be, because he's only 19, right? So he's not as, like you say, there's a naivety to him, I
yeah.
suppose. And he's obviously dedicated. Like he's shown that he'll drum through his hands literally bleeding, and he pushes himself past all kind of limits throughout. So he's got the work ethic, and he's got the like sort of discipline to actually work hard. But then it comes back to the idea of what we're talking about. The cost of greatness is like, does he actually understand what the cost is for him to be like one of the greatest jazz drummers of all time? And yeah, I think maybe they leave it kind of ambiguous because the director has kind of said that. Like, have you read about what the director says
No.
about this character? So I feel like we're skipping ahead to the end. I might save this till we talk about the end of the movie because that is such a pivotal scene. I don't want to just
Mm,
jump straight into
okay.
that, but we'll talk about that in a bit. But yeah, the kid. So him wanting to be like special is an interesting one as well because I think. I guess, what are your thoughts on the idea that he's looking for a surrogate father figure in Fletcher?
Well, that's, I guess, the interesting part because like he's got a dad that seems
He
like
has a dad who's
supportive of
present,
all,
right?
right?
Yeah,
Yeah, and it's like it's his mom that's not present, so a bit of flipped of some script there and stuff.
yeah,
And uh, if anything, going back to just that relationship and wanting to be special, and like you mentioned, determination and all that, right? And
yeah.
bleeding, like there's always the phrase like blood, sweat, and tears. Well, in this
Uh-huh.
movie, he literally goes through that quite often, all three,
He
sometimes
does.
often at the same time.
Yeah,
And it's is again is that view of greatness again what Fletcher sees as required, and Andrew, putting in the hours, is that determination because he thinks it's the way to get it, or because somebody else told him this is what it takes to get it? It's a bit of both, right? Because
yeah.
you don't, as he did, break up with your girlfriend, take out everything in your dorm room, and like just practice. Like that is a true version of somebody like, I will sacrifice everything for this thing I want, which to me is commendable. Like that is something that most people don't do. And yes, it's a
No.
fictional story, but
Mhm.
there are worldly people out there that cut off all social ties and everything. But I wonder from how much of, let's say, the blood part of it is Fletcher's view of this is what's required to be
Yeah.
great. This is what's required to have that determination. And then Fletcher's playing his own part. Because again, just like Andrew listening to Fletcher and like hanging on his every word, Fletcher keeps repeating that thing of
It was another
Palmer,
jazz player, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
some famous jazz player, and he just heard a story about throwing a cymbal at somebody's head, and that made him great. So he's throwing chairs, like he's just imitating what he heard from somebody.
Yeah.
So it's like he doesn't know what greatness is either, but he's just imitating it and hoping it'll magically happen. So he's
And
like, I've got to be tough, just like somebody else did.
that's the fucked up thing as well, is like he even says in the bar he's never had anybody
Yeah.
through these methods be one of the greats, but he seems to think that this is the right, this is the path to it. But like, yeah, where did he get that idea from? Like, do you think maybe this is one of those cycle of abuse where his teacher was abusive to him and, expand out, infinite times?
I think actually I might relate it to a story I just heard in a different podcast the other day. There's an author named Derek Sivers that I send you lots of quotes from and stuff.
Yeah.
He lives in New Zealand now. He's an ex-American. He's got great writing and TED Talks and everything.
Hell yeah.
And I'm going to talk about one of his things because I probably mentioned on the first one of these series of his Hell Yes or No. He's got a book called it or Hell Yeah or No. It's a philosophy that I just heard him in a podcast this past week talk about how people misinterpret it, right? So the thought here is how Fletcher heard this story of somebody throwing a cymbal at this guy's head, and that made him a great drummer. And in this case, Derek Sivers talks about how basically he said hell yes or no because he was using it in times of like when there's so many opportunities and so many decisions, how to like hone in on the one you want. Now, in this case, Andrew said, hell yes, I want to become the greatest. So he broke up with his girlfriend again, did all that stuff we mentioned. But then Derek said in this podcast that he's like, so many people called in and like, hey man, I'm using this for everything. And I'm like telling everybody, hell no, I can't go hang out with you. Hell no, I can't do that. He's like, no, that wasn't the point. You've misinterpreted this thing that's supposed to be a tool. And so I wonder for Fletcher the same way. He heard the story and I was like, I have to be abusive. That's the golden ticket. And obviously though, it hadn't worked yet because nobody had done it. And if anything, a kid committed suicide from it. So you've only got negative wins you don't have any wins. You just all got losses, but yet you're still stuck on this idea.
That's right. We should have mentioned that earlier, but yeah, he did have a former student who hanged himself because, well,
which I guess also I don't know if that's a touchy subject. I feel like it's okay.
I'll chuck a trigger warning at the start because I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so not only has he not produced the next, was it Bobby Coltrane or something? Was that the name? I don't know. He had some drummer.
Bird. I just know the name Bird was like the guy who's like, if this one guy, look, see how much we know about jazz is we're like, this one guy that was named in a thing, and he became Bird because he got a cymbal thrown at his head. Yeah.
And his logic is that because Nyman says to him, what happens if you would have had the next so and so, but you discouraged him with all this abuse? He doesn't say it exactly like that. He kind of says that in a different wording, and then he says, well, the next so and so wouldn't be discouraged by this, and you do wonder why Fletcher believes that so strongly when he's never had the result. As a matter of fact, he's been taking his methods have been removing talented jazz players from the world, which is just staggering to think about.
Yeah, it's like gaslighting through. I mean, I'm still bad at using that term, but I feel like that term applies to like most of this movie of like telling you you're great, but then you're not great. You're great, you're not great, and just like twisting things. I feel like there's a bit of Stockholm syndrome of like, Andrew like loving his captor, if you will.
Yes,
in some ways.
That's a great segue into let's talk about some of this abusive behavior, because I think what's so tough about this character of Fletcher is like, because J.K. Simmons, he can be so warm and encouraging and upbeat and just this this amazing sort of male mentor character. Because do you remember when? So I guess he doesn't start off abusive straight away. Is he? Picks
I mean, technically he does, like I said, right? First, that opening scene, like I mentioned, it was that, you sound good. Why'd you stop playing? No, why'd you start playing? So technically, right from the start, he does start this mind game.
True, it is mind games. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Oh, you're right. I know what you're talking about. Of those early things, he's all nice and like, hey, just give it your best. Just hang out, have a good time. Yeah.
He takes him into the hallway and he's asking about his family life and you want to be great, don't you? And he really like. What's so devious about it is like, and I think abusive people do this, is your first interaction with them will be something really positive like that. So then when they take it away, your whole the whole dynamic of the relationship with them is you just thinking, well, like I can get that version of them back if I just do this and that, and you know, like it,
Independent. Like
yeah,
Andrew feels like or at least it looks like he's dependent on him. His dad asks,
mm,
like probably halfway through the movie, like, so like you seem to really highly value his opinion. He's like, yeah, I do. So it's like Andrew's almost been brainwashed into, but brainwashed yet also believe just it's his own fault and his own flaw of believing that this guy is his savior, that this is the only guy. He was in
mm,
another band class before this. But you're made to think that, oh, if he stayed in that other band class, see how Fletcher walked over that other professor and teacher,
yeah, yeah,
he would have never made it if he was in that other class. So it's like there's this feeling, like you were saying, of like abusive relationships, as if he's the only person for you. He's the only one that can keep you safe and give you promise and hope. Just like, no, if it was, abusive, let's say partnership, like, no, nobody's ever going to love you unless you're with me.
yeah,
Only I can put up with you because you're such a terrible person.
yeah. And what's so like, I've heard an interview with Billy Corgan talking about how this happens, where when you're in the music industry, um, he was talking about his relationship with the record label, where the Smashing Pumpkins were gigantic, selling I don't know how many millions, billions of records, and he's like, while you're doing this, the record labels are telling you that everything you want to do is making a mistake, and it was almost accidental that you were here, and just everything to beat you down, to make you think that you need them. And the analogy he uses, he said, like, it would be like you found a needle in the haystack, and then they told you that actually wasn't. Oh no, that's not actually that impressive of
Yeah.
a of an achievement. Um, and that's what I find so fascinating about the movie, and because he's obviously a talented drummer, and I assume the whole band are very talented, because like you see them playing, and when they're not being constantly stopped and started by Fletcher because they're a millisecond off beat or tempo or whatever it is, um, they're obviously talented. But the fact that 90% of the scenes with Fletcher, he's berating them and talking about how it's not good enough and all this, and you think to yourself, like, are they actually any good at jazz, or is this guy's standards just they're in the top 99, or they're in the top 1%, but even still he thinks that's not good enough to be it's they enter a lot of contests and stuff throughout the movie, and you almost think, and then what's so genius about that is, because I was thinking, are these guys any good? That's exactly the mental technique
Yeah.
that Fletcher's giving to them, where they think they're crap and they think they're not good enough, and yada yada. So it's insane how even that was working on me, just watching the movie, not being the one who's being yelled at by Fletcher.
And I realized too, there's a lot of parallels. Like, I love seeing a movie and then thinking, I wonder if the director and screenwriter saw these other 10 movies and were inspired by them, right? Because every
Mm.
story has a bit of every story you've heard before. That's what humans are, and the stories we've told for millennia.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was thinking that naturally, Fletcher, J.K. Simmons essentially looks like a drill sergeant, right? Like when you go into the military, from what I've heard, it's the idea that you're trying to strip people of their individuality in the military. This is what I've heard
Yes.
again, right? It's the idea of, you are coming in here, I'm going to make you a soldier, and by doing that, I'm going to strip you of all of your things. You're going to listen to me. I am the only savior of you. I am it. So I thought of Full Metal Jacket, right? Because he feels very
that's
much
what I was
like,
going to say.
exactly. When I saw the smile on their face, like, yeah, you know where I'm going. It very much feels like Full Metal Jacket, right? And so
It
there's
does.
a spoiler for that as well. It's like, what is it? Like, it's an old movie now.
Mm.
But Sergeant Pyle in that, or whatever is Pyle, whatever his
Private
rank was.
Pyle. Yeah.
Private Pyle. Like, eventually, right, he attacks the drill sergeant because he was berated so much. And like
Yes.
Andrew in this, that same way, like midway through, Andrew finally snaps and tackles Fletcher on stage after he got in a car wreck and all this. So it's like, it's very I actually wonder if it'd be like beat for beat in a way of like this, like yelling at you, treating you bad, and then like the attacking your teacher would actually really be cool to see, like, minute by minute, in which minutes of the films. Because I don't know if you ever know this, but I learned this when I was looking at like learning how to do screenwriting and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
About halfway through the movie is always the midpoint, and literally almost by the minute in a lot of films is like the bottom of the bottom, when everything has gone to shit. And I love pausing on movies where I'm like, oh man, this is like the characters in the worst place possible, and I pause it. It's like exactly 52 of 52 minutes remaining.
Fascinating.
So I really wonder if Full Metal Jacket and this, if you put them beat by beat, would they roughly have the same progression?
That is an interesting thought. We might have to do some experiments. Do you know what you mentioned? So I was honestly just watching because, a disclaimer: as horrible and as homophobic and as racist as Sergeant Gunnery is in what do you call it, in
Full Metal Jacket.
Full Metal Jacket, that scene is so funny for so many reasons, and like just the way he talks to them, where he'll be like, "Do you think I'm cute?" Whatever, and you're like, why is he asking him if another grown man if he thinks he's cute? Like, it's just, and his relationship with them, it has this undertone of like funny to me for some reason, even though he's saying
Fletcher's
horrible things to them.
So much of Fletcher, what he says is, oh my god, like if you any of that took it out of context, or it's just it is not for people who don't want to.
Yes.
But you know what? I looked it up too. This movie got 5 Oscar nominations, and 3 of them won, including J.K. Simmons for Best Supporting Actor. So the character is good. He has played it well, but it is not a character. Actually, I was about to say it's not a character you like, but in a weird kind of way. I think, as you kind of said, you kind of feel like you're on that ride of like, I don't want to upset. I want to show him back, but I also don't want to upset him because you still feel for his happiness at the end of the film. So it's like a weird. It is twisted.
Well, I think the reason we sort of, I guess, even though he's horrible to the students, I guess we can start talking about the end now, because the end. Let me say this one bit. So, literally just talking about Full Metal Jacket before. In the book, apparently, when Private Pyle shoots Gunnery, his last words are, "I'm proud of you, Private Pyle," because the whole process of yelling at them and forcing them to do all these exercises and literally to break them down and turn them into a mindless killing machine, and the fact that that's what Private Pyle did meant that Gunnery was successful.
Yeah.
As horrible as that outcome is. And then so that ties kind of like into the end, like you say, he tackles what happens. So he gets
literal whiplash from a car.
Yeah. So the abuse kind of reaches a peak, and does Andrew quit, or is Andrew dismissed from the school? I can't remember.
Well, after he tackles him at Fletcher on stage, he is dismissed from the school. You see like an expel kind of letter at some point.
Oh yes, there was 2 fights that he sort of had with Fletcher. The first one was when he had to rent that car because he had the worst luck possible, where the bus he was taking a bus to a performance, and the friggin' bus had a flat tire. So through no fault of his own, really, he was late, and then while he was driving in a rental car, he had a car accident, and then still managed to get on stage. But he was weak, and he was dropping his sticks.
Concussed. He's 100%. The car flipped over. He's bleeding everywhere. It's 100% concussed.
Yeah. So then, at that point, he tackles Fletcher, and does he start punching Fletcher, or are they just kind of wrestling?
I think it was just wrestling.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that is, that's like the last, because after that he is expelled from the school. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. So then he runs into Fletcher in a bar. Oh, that's right. He sort of reluctantly testifies that Fletcher's teaching methods were abusive and probably drove this kid to hang himself. And
just pause real quick. That's when I mentioned the Stockholm syndrome. It's a bit of that, right? It's almost like
he doesn't want to.
Stockholm syndrome says you almost rebel against authority, and in that way, he's almost rebelling at this, like the lawyers in the school. He's like, I don't want to turn them in because he helped me. He was so good to me. So he was like really reluctant to turn on his, if you will, captor. Sorry.
It seems like somewhere in there as well, like, so this whole idea of romanticizing the struggle in art, I feel like we all do it, but it does more harm than good, I think, because so I heard this fantastic quote in a show. Have you seen this TV show called From?
No. Oh no. My wife's watching it. If we just start talking, I may have watched one episode, but I forget what it is. I know the name now.
The gist of it is humans live in this little town. It's a very Stephen King sort of temple of the mind. They can't escape, and at nighttime monsters come out, but they have talismans they put against their doors which stop the monsters from getting in, but the monsters still they can talk to them and still trying to convince them to come out. And so fantastic show. I'm really enjoying it. But there was a line
one I'll
in
read
it
on IMDb later.
Yes, please do. Please read the plot about it, and then we can talk about it. And I can fill any gaps that you've had. There was this quote in it that I was like, "God damn, that is the human condition right there." Where, so without spoiling too much, the monsters pick one particular character, and they essentially decide to leave him alone in order to make him, watch as they kill other people and torment him and so on and so forth. And one of the monsters says to him at one point when they're having he has this sort of, why are you doing this kind of conversation with one of the monsters. And the monster says something to the effect of, we have to give you hope because then you'll endure more. And that's the thing, is the monsters want them to suffer is basically the thing.
That's a good tagline for this episode.
Yeah. And so I feel like because Nyman has hope that he might become one of the greats, he's willing to put himself through literally a car accident, literally drumming until his hands bleed, taking all this abuse from Fletcher, and because he sees the light at the end of the tunnel essentially. And the analogy I always thought of is if you had to walk across a bed of coals in bare feet and you couldn't see the end of it, you would have no hope or whatever. But let's say you can see the end of the coals, you would be probably more willing to walk across them because in your mind, okay, it's just 10 more steps and then I'm off the bed of coals. And then, if this was some kind of Sisyphean task, then, you what do you call it? You would just, it would extend when you get to the end or what have you. Just see.
So you started to talk about the end as well, getting towards the end. So we talked about, he tackled the teacher, got expelled from the school. You said, you started to talk about the jazz club. So he sees Fletcher. It's the first time we actually see Fletcher playing music. Because up until this point, it's like you've got this really abusive guy. And I kept thinking, how does he know anything? Because
I was so angry at him for that as well. Yeah. So he plays piano, which then apparently, according to reviews of this movie, you remember how he's talking about how Starbucks releases these crappy jazz CDs every year? Some of the comments I'd seen about it were and then Fletcher goes and plays the most Starbucks jazz piano you've ever heard in a bar.
Which I think is probably, I hope it's almost, maybe this is one of the other Oscars, because there was an Oscar for sound and an Oscar for editing, I think, were the three that won. And maybe that's the point, which would be brilliant from the filmmakers if that's true. If they made that intentional, because I think, again, as the audience that's essentially a student sitting there with Andrew, it is kind of you're oh, how does he know what he's doing? How does he know you're not on my time? How does he know anything? He doesn't have any credibility other than the statements he makes. So even seeing him there, you're okay, so he plays, but it's not like any of the songs you've heard so far. It's just kind of this wishy-washy.
So different.
Yeah. So you're oh yeah, you start to feel a little bit of that maybe hero mentality now, because you're kind of like Andrew, I'm pushed out, I'm kicked out, and you start to have that I'm better than you now, and then going to see him and he was okay. So I think as an audience, you're kind of making that narrative in your head that you're you know what, screw that guy, he's not better than me.
Yeah. And then so another one of his little abusive tricks is when they meet in this jazz bar after he gets fired from the school. It's so weird. It's almost like the character of Fletcher, and I suspect this might be another layer to his mental games, that in the school, when there's a student-teacher dynamic, he's going to be as much of a tyrant as he wants to, or as he believes is necessary to achieve greatness. But then it's almost like outside of the school, he treats Nyman as kind of like an equal, or maybe not necessarily equal, but an old friend. Do you know what I mean? And it's
he seems to have learned his ways. Fletcher seems docile now. He seems calm about the whole thing. Seems like he appreciates that maybe I did push people too hard.
Yeah. And then that's another layer to this sort of these mind games, is that Nyman basically forgives him and is they're sort of chatting like they're old friends, and I sort of thought,
Like you're gonna
geez, I
get
don't
back
know if
with your ex-girlfriend, like, or your ex-boyfriend. You're like, oh, he wasn't that bad. It's just, I just misunderstood him
yeah,
at the time.
uh-huh. And that's the scary thing as well. And then, so then the plot sort of moves forward a bit where he asks Andrew, he says, I'm playing in some, what's it, like a charity ball? He's playing in
Yeah.
something.
Something
And he
that
says, my drum,
will have people that will recognize you. This is where, people from the Lincoln Center, as he keeps talking, they might be watching. So if you play this well,
yeah,
you could be back to forget school. I know you got flunked out yourself, and I'm not a teacher there, but both of us could achieve greatness because we don't, there might be
yeah.
somebody in the audience.
He always dangles that over his students throughout the movie. He always says, now, you know, this music school versus music school concert. Oh, there's always people from the Lincoln Center watching this, and yeah, it's like whether they are or not, we don't know. But he just hangs that as another carrot to, another layer to control. And like, showbiz can be a dirty industry like that, and you always hear comics and producers talking about that sort of thing to, who knows who's watching in the crowd and that kind of, um, just another little, gassing people up. Oh, you should be on the TV and all this kind of thing. But it's like, you want to be like, how do you know that though? Do you know what I mean? And then so he basically sets him up because he says, "Oh, we get these two songs they play. It's Caravan and it's Whiplash. That's the two, right?"
Yep.
And
Because
so he says,
Whiplash,
"We're just going to be
Caravan's
playing."
really good and really hard, and then Whiplash is, as the name of the title of the movie, that's the double time one, I think, right? It's the double time, the one that they spent like 11 hours trying to get on the right tempo before of exactly like 600 beats per minute. It's like the grand crescendo, the ultimate achievement if you can play Whiplash. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
So he brings him along, and then just as the show's about to start, Fletcher walks over to him and leans in and is like, I knew it was you.
Yeah.
And then he tells him to play something else. And so
with no sheet music, yeah.
Andrew's trying to sort of I think he's trying to improvise.
Yeah.
But then the others are leaning in and being like, "What the hell are you doing, man?"
Yeah, they don't know. They're just like, "Don't you have the music? Why aren't you doing? Why are you ruining it for all of us?" Like now, like Andrew's the bad guy now. Yeah.
And then so what does he do? He walks off the stage, and then
Well, because essentially, like because he's improvising, and this is because I just watched this again, like right before. Fletcher like calls it like right then, and then like Andrew has a few extra beats, and then Fletcher turns to the audience like, this guy, he's trying to be a soloist over here, like oh, look at this. I think he says like, oh, sorry for the bit of that, a drummer wants to be a little avant-garde, and so basically Andrew walks off in shame.
Yes,
like he just gets up.
That's right.
You see a tear like right at the edge of his eye. Walks off. His dad runs out to get him, which is great for a dad, by the way. So the dad's like, "Oh my god, I knew this guy was a piece of shit." His dad runs up there like, "Son, you've done nothing wrong." I mean, I'm getting like goosebumps just thinking about how good his dad was as a character.
His dad goes to the movies with him every week, and like he's obviously very present in his son's life. So then after that, he.
Well, I can explain it if you want. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, but I want to frame this for the people that are listening. Like, this ending scene is almost like as much of a triumph, as an individual triumph of it is for the main character to like finally stand up for himself. The way it's written in the script is it is also like a battle between his father and Fletcher for who. I don't want to say is controlling Andrew, but who is influencing Andrew. And I think it's set up like his father just wants him to like, he loves him unconditionally. And he says, son, it's okay. You don't have to do this. Like, I'm going to, because there was another scene in the movie where he obviously comes from a very competitive family with like, he's got like, cousins or something who are
best friends or some, or family friends or something like that. Yeah,
I threw something yards in a football game and whatever, and like they're really celebrating all these athletic achievements, and then they're like, "And how's your drumming coming, Andrew? Your drumming's going good, is it? Oh, that's good." And then they just sort of don't ask any further questions on it. They just think, "Oh, his little drum kit and whatever."
And really, just quickly on that scene, because
Yeah.
that's where you're, because we never really talked about it, but that's where you're seeing Andrew change. He's becoming like Fletcher back in that rewind of that family dinner, because that's when Andrew starts like speaking out and be like, yeah, well, you're just a local team. Like, what are you? Like, you're nothing. I'm going to be great. And so like
True.
he's just hearing Fletcher's words, and you can see that progression for the first half of him, you know, aggressively, kind of like Private Pilot, and all, like just go like, you know, yelling at the other drummers, criticizing others, being so vocal, looking at Fletcher in the eye and yelling at him back. And like, that's what Fletcher wanted, just like Private Pilot and Sergeant, of like, I want you to fight back because that's who is strong. Everybody else averts their eyes. Andrew's now like the one kid in studio band that's like aggressively, but now he's
That's
alienating
right.
everybody around him the same way by being Fletcher. Yeah. So
That's right.
that's the back. So yeah, we're going back to the end here where he walks off stage. Yeah.
And then so his father sort of comforts him a little bit, but then he sort of aggressively walks back on, and then I forget exactly how it plays out. Does he just start drumming?
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, J.K. Simmons, which is actually, I'm still a bit confused about one little part right here, because like first when you see him turn around and walk back from his dad, as the audience, you're kind of like, yeah, like go, man, this is going to be the big moment. Andrew's standing up for himself. It's that final like hero's tale, you know, coming back, learning his things. He's going to be his own person. He's going to do it his way. And
It's the fight with Darth Vader in front of the Emperor, kind of, isn't it?
Yeah, and first, what's interesting is, okay, you know, Fletcher's still on stage explaining like the next songs. They don't have a drummer right now, so it's like the only plot hole that I keep sitting with is like,
what was his plan?
Yeah, like because when Andrew walks back, he looks briefly kind of like he's happy, like good, he's learned, right? He's coming back for more, and you know, this time I won't fuck with him because maybe he's learned his lesson now. But at the same point, his point of inviting him on stage was to ruin Andrew in front of everyone, ruining his life and kicking him out of the school. But it's like, yeah, who was going to play drums there? There's no backup, you see. But yeah, so Andrew gets back on the set, and immediately as Fletcher starts the talk, that's when Andrew like hits the drums, and it's like the fight is on. It's one of the best descriptions I've ever heard. And I might bungle this, but C. Robert Cargill wrote Doctor Strange, and Sinister, and a lot of other movies. He's got a podcast called Junk Food Cinema, plugging other podcasts because I like these. But basically, he talks about arguments are just fights with your. It's basically a fight with your. Instead of fighting with your fist, an argument is like verbally fighting with your fist. Or he's got a quote like that. I've bungled it like crazy. So this is like,
I know what you mean. Yeah,
is Fletcher and him, instead of yelling at each other and literally fist fighting on stage, it's now through music. So Andrew walks out like, I'm going to interrupt you with a cymbal crash, and I'm just going to start beating away. Fletcher walks over like, what are you doing? And that, at first at one point, because I wrote this down because I love it, Fletcher, as he's playing Caravan, Fletcher walks over to him angry. He's like, I'm going to gouge your eyes out. And Fletcher, and then Andrew like hits the cymbal and hits J.K. Simmons in the jaw. It's like, it's literally fighting, but with cymbals and drum kits in between them. Oh, it's so good.
Yeah. Because that's one thing I found. It was a weird reference to call back from, but it was originally a critique of the character Negan from The Walking Dead. They added him into Tekken 7, and they talked about how it was either Tekken 7 or 8. I think it was 7. They were talking about how it's weird that they would take Negan from The Walking Dead, because in The Walking Dead, it's not. The characters do fight each other, but they are more like ideological fight. The fights are almost just it's just an expression of the ideological differences between all these characters. And the idea of Negan is that he's very psychological, and he would break people down, much like like Fletcher would. And he had this whole thing of, who are you? I'm Negan. Have you seen what I'm talking about, or is this all new to you?
I watched some like a lot of TV shows. I would watch like the first 2 episodes and then read IMDb things, and then watch like the final episode and then get like the entire idea of the entire 6-season story. I've done this with so many TV shows.
Me too. Yeah. So the idea of Negan is like they were kind of like, why would they put a character who's, I mean, he does fight a little bit and he does kill people with his baseball bat and stuff, but they say the whole idea of that season is the ideological struggle between Rick and Negan, and so the fist fighting thing is almost just incidental, and it's a bit like how you say the drum off is almost more of a clash of wills than they're not playing music at each other, but like you say, it is kind of shot because then after he hits him with the cymbal, he just starts playing, and so they play a bit of Caravan, but then towards the end, he kind of gets like a solo.
Yeah, well, he just doesn't let Fletcher stop because like Fletcher tries to stop the band and he just keeps going. And I just realized in the whole really, really beating a dead horse with his Full Metal Jacket analogy, it literally
Yeah.
is that, right? It's like after he hits J.K. Simmons with the cymbal, it's like that's when J.K. is essentially shot like the sergeant, like, oh, you finally accomplished it. You stood up to me in a way that's also proving yourself because you're not just a bad drummer. Now you are like the guy that I've wanted all along. And yeah, so Andrew just keeps playing, making his own solo up, doing this thing. And you could see then J.K. Simmons slowly starting to really like has like stars in his eyes because he's like, I can't. Andrew's won now. He's won the fight. Andrew's now like, I'm going to keep going even further. And we know from earlier in the movie, again, Whiplash is this double time swing. It's super hard. You could see the sweat again pouring on Andrew's face. You're watching close up
the symbols and stuff.
Let's just say the character's hands, because there's technically, apparently 40% of this movie was Miles Teller drumming. Which is actually pretty cool. But aside from that,
it is,
so it's like, yeah, he's going, and then you can know like, oh, he's gonna do it. It's the big last thing in the movie, and that's where like JK just now is following him. Because then Andrew goes, I'll time you in, or I'll call you in, or whatever, cue you in.
Yeah,
and
he
then
does,
it's like,
doesn't he?
he's now the conductor of the entire band. And then that last musical number is just amazing. It's intense. It's fun. And at this point, he's definitely the ringleader of the entire stage, the entire band. He is the center of all of it. Yeah, and I've got one more scene, at least for the end, that I'll mention, but I'll pause there because my excitement gets the better of me.
Yeah. So that, like you say, he does say to Fletcher several times, I'll count you in. Yeah. And so, like, if you read the script of that scene as well, and then also you watch the reactions of the other characters, it was really clever because a lot of the characters are actually more looking scared than looking happy. Like his father, you see his face looks horrified, and apparently the script, the way it's written, it says Andrew is playing, he's pushing himself beyond the limits of what is human, or it says something along those lines.
Look like he's not a human, like he's just this god amongst drummers now, like he's better than
and they say like, and it says something to the effect of like, this is not good, that's the kind of thing there. And like you say, it's like I was saying before, the who's going to be influencing him more between his father and Fletcher's, like at this point he's dived into the deep end of Fletcher's influence, and like Fletcher has basically won this battle of influence between his father and Fletcher. And it's like you said, like that's kind of what Fletcher wanted, was for him to stand up for himself and kind of give it back to him. And I'm like, you said you've got a bit for towards the end, so I've got a bit maybe
in that
like
last scene. There's one shot is my favorite shot of the entire movie, I think. I could. Do you want to explain? So basically, in that final bit, I think it's either right before he starts Whiplash or right at the very end, like when he's really done it. It beautifully shot in that you just see Fletcher's eyes and like just the top of his
eyes,
and basically that Andrew's made it, if you will, right? As an audience, because you can tell by the creases in Fletcher's cheeks that he's smiling, like for the first time, but you never see it, right? Because they don't want to show you almost Fletcher like being happy, but it's this great like I don't know, if as somebody who's always been anxious what other people think of him. And that's in my life, which is why I think I love this now so much. It is that thing of like, you feel like you're appreciated. You feel like, oh, I've done good by this role model. Again, abusive wise, but it's the story you've built up in your head the entire time. So I love that you actually, as the audience, don't get the satisfaction of seeing Fletcher's teeth smiling. You just see the crease and you're like, oh, I've done good. So it's like, wow. It is still like you don't actually still get to feel 100% like you've won. It's still like, since he's out of frame, he's still the bigger face, the bigger man. I was really hoping for a minute that Andrew actually became the winner there, but really I guess Fletcher still, with that shot, has still some level of control and the authority to say you've done a good job.
Yeah, and then so my follow-up, so the reason I wanted to just get your view there is because I'm interested in talking about after the end of the movie. And another thing I noticed as well is like, I just keep thinking like, what is the audience thinking when he's going through this ridiculous drum solo? Because I thought in my head, like, these two were having this amazing moment where to them the only thing that existed was each other, and everything else was just not there. But were the audience thinking like, man, this is some good drumming, like this kid's one of the greats, or were they thinking, what the fuck are they doing? Like, why does this song have such a long drum solo at the end of it?
And you know what to me what this is, because we've kind of dabbled around it a bit. It's basically a superhero fight in the middle of the city, right? Where the audience is the people in the apartment buildings going, you're knocking down skyscrapers, you're killing my friends and family. Like, Superman and whoever he's fighting is in the middle of the city and blowing things up. But it's like they're the helpless people going, like, I've got to clean all this up tomorrow. Like, you just broke my window.
Yeah.
They don't.
I just wanted to watch some jazz.
Yeah.
And I think that another reason I find this movie so fascinating is like the idea of this magical 1% between like 99% great and 100% great is like the average person is not even really probably going to know how good of a drummer that Nyman is, because like, it's like when you say audiophiles, they care about things to do with audio that the average person doesn't even notice the difference between. And the idea of like, I look at the character of Nyman and I think like, this is just from my own point of view where I'm like, okay, well, he wants to be like one of the greats, but what does that even look like? And he talks about this drummer that he listens to who does this kind of amazing jazz drumming. And like, I'm pretty sure they play some snippets of it.
Yeah,
and
Buddy
I hear
Rich.
it and
I do know Buddy Rich just a little bit, because I remember I had a drum kit in my apartment in university for a while, because I did a little 3-piece band that I ran. We were not good. We were all self-taught, but I became fascinated in some drummers back then. And Buddy Rich, from the little I know, like I really don't know, I can't tell you what he did. All I know is I saw one YouTube clip of like him being on basically like a really shoddy platform where they turned his drum kit upside down. He's sitting on it and he's playing completely upside down, but it's like what, the 60s or 70s or something, or so it's really floppy. It's basically like 5 guys in the back like holding him up in this drum kit, and he's playing upside down, but he's going like super speed. And then I think this is like 20 years ago when I watched these clips. It was like comparing it to like Slipknot today, who like do the same thing and like huge theatrics for drumming. So like
Slipknot and I think like Van Halen or something. Maybe they did something like that.
So it's like this Buddy Rich guy that he's listening. You see him pop in the CDs multiple times. That was like that original guy that they talk about, of like the best at the time.
Yeah, and I almost look at it and like, this is probably a little bit of my philosophy with stand up, what I'm trying to do with stand up as well. But like, I sort of look at it and I think, okay, so you want to be one of the greats. What does it actually look like for you? Like, Van Gogh, people say one of the greatest painters of all time, died penniless, you know what I mean? Didn't have a good life as such, and it was only appreciated after his death. And I sort of look at it like, Nyman, he obviously wouldn't be happy just going on to be like a working jazz musician, which he probably could have very easily done, right? Like, I'm sure if he just went to some clubs, auditioned, and I sort of, I guess this is where I don't understand. It's like, what the idea of greatness maybe is abstract in a sense, where you're sort of like, okay, sure, you're one of the best jazz drummers in the world, but like, what does your life look like to have to achieve that? And like, would you not be happier just doing the art form that you love, playing in a couple of jazz bars around? Like, it's New York City, right? How many fucking jazz bars and motel, or hotel, whatever it is, the thing that he goes to at the end of the terminal, some kind of little club at the base of like a Ramada Inn. And like, the director has said that because of the ending of the movie, Andrew is going to die before 30 of a heroin overdose. Like, that's his life. And so he's got 10 years of being one of the greats, and then he's done. And you're kind of like, fuck, that is a downer ending.
Join the 27 Club.
Right? Yeah, that's it, man.
So I like this because there's 2 parts to it. One part, I want to maybe get back to this, but I'll mention it now, because you're saying something. I'm looking at my own sheet of what I wrote down. It's like, how do you define great and know you've done it? Now, between these two, Fletcher is the one who defined what great was. For
Mm.
Fletcher, it was, I'm like, again, like the parent who has this world renowned, everybody knows them drummer, even if they kill themselves, this is what he wants. And then for Andrew, he's basically telling him, you are only validated once the Lincoln Center invites you. Only then are you a great drummer, right? So he's set like weird expectations for both of them that are moving targets. And so in some ways it's like, okay, unless Lincoln Center invites Andrew one day to their band, then he's not ever great. Okay. Well, even by the end, he's not great then because he's only achieved what
Mm.
Fletcher wanted. So it's like
Mm.
for us in comedy and writing and anything, any other hobbies or any job, it's a thing I've been thinking about a lot. I don't have the answer yet. And I don't, nobody ever will. It's all changing. But like, what is great for you? That if you don't define it, then you don't really know how much or little to do. This is just half of it because, as a little aside, I've been talking with people like, jobs and money. It's like, well, I need to earn more money.
Mm.
But for what? If you don't know what you want to do with it, then how do you know when you have enough, right? Like,
Yeah.
what if all you need to drum, once you have a drum kit, the bare minimum money outside of food and shelter and keeping your drum kit safe is buying new heads and cymbals, right? And sticks.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of that, do you actually need more? And then define what does that good life look like? What is that good hobby? Like,
Yeah.
what is great? That's one half. I'll pause there because that's deep as in its own.
Yeah, and it's like this could be one of those knock-on effects of capitalism where they sort of like, in order for the economy to keep working. George Carlin said this in his when he was talking about no, not 7 deadly sins. What's the thing? 10 Commandments. And he says that the commandment about thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's ox or whatever it was. He said bullshit. Leave coveting alone. Coveting keeps the economy moving.
Yeah.
He says your neighbor gets a new car, you've got to get a better car than him, and whatever. And
well, that's this movie, right? It's like, oh, that drummer's better than you. If you don't covet his skills and his seat at the drum set, you will never be great. And so, yeah, it's like actually right. So all of this, if you take from the 10 Commandments, this entire movie is basically failing that one.
Thou shalt not worship another god. It's like, yeah, no. So, but yeah, that I don't live particularly well. Like I live pretty skint. I've been doing the whole comedy quiz thing for coming up on 2 years now, and I'm like just barely afloat. I'm losing like a little bit of money, but it swings and roundabouts, right? And I've had people say kind of like, they're like, oh, but what about like, wouldn't you like to save more money and all that kind of, and granted you do need a buffer because you're always having things happen like pets getting sick or the car breaks down or whatever it is. But at the same time, people that are sort of have this mania put in them of like, I got to get more money. I got to make more money. Like you say, those two great. The question is for what? Like it's like what it's that whole thing of like upkeep. It's like, oh, I want to get a jet, not a jet ski, or a boat or something. And then you're like, well, now you've got to find somewhere to keep the boat, and you've got to maintain the boat. And it's like getting a pool in your backyard. That just seems like constant agony, keeping that thing clean, keeping it maintained. And that being said, like I think I'm pretty ascetic. Like my list of joys and stuff are good. It's quite a small list of things that I enjoy and stuff like that. And
so I think actually this is a good
stuff, but
it's the second thing I was going to mention on the same topic, and mainly why you mentioned joy, and you kind of hit on this with Andrew as well. It's this idea of passion, and again, how far to go. And to me, if you haven't told anybody listening, hopefully still at this point, we've now entered the deep like philosophy part of this podcast. The deep like life moment, like you're going to sit on your couch for another hour in silence going, what? Or at least that's my hope. Break everybody's brain. It's I also go back to Derek Sivers. He said, if you, and I sent you this message, Taylor, this week because it broke my brain. It's like, if you couldn't tell anybody about the thing you were doing and nobody could see it, would you still do it? And so if we think about Andrew first before us, it's like, well, for him, he could know in his heart that he can play the best songs in the entire world, right? He can play the most challenging. He could do Whiplash on his own. If nobody ever
Yeah.
heard it, would he still keep playing it? Or as the characters we see, he kind of seems to believe and have fallen into that trap of he needs external validation. It's like if he doesn't
Hmm.
get the Lincoln Center or Fletcher's approval, then he's not great. Whereas his dad's side, as you mentioned earlier, is the unconditional love. His dad could be like, dude, you could play the worst drums in the world. I'll still love you. And it's like, so what is Andrew doing it for? And so then
Hmm.
for us, in the same way, whether it's money or comedy or anything, it's like if you did this and nobody could see it, would you still do it? If you, another one that Derek Sivers said that was very much resonant to me. I talk about like traveling in the world, right? And I want to see things. And he's like, cool. If you traveled the world and you couldn't take pictures of anything, or you left your camera at home, your phone at home, and you never told a soul that you went, would you still find that as your passion? Would you still spend all of your money to travel the world and do all that stuff for you intrinsically? Or are you
Hmm.
wanting some story to tell to friends and people and get the praise and gravitas and all the things that comes with that? What is
Yeah.
you versus an external motivation?
Hmm. But you're asking me the question.
I'm just
We'll put it this way,
this is
man.
the royal you. This is like to everybody of like why
Yeah.
are we doing what we're doing?
Listener,
That's the question. Yeah.
ask yourself this question. I can wholeheartedly say I would and have been doing a podcast for 2 years with very few number of people listening. So yes,
Yeah.
I can fucking prove that I would do this
Yeah.
if no one was watching. But
Yeah, like
the thing
we
is,
could still talk about this without like this what I
we would have this conversation off camera
because this
over a bowl of
yeah,
ramen
just
any
because
day of
we
the
enjoy
week.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, like and also this is a weird way to say it on a podcast. Taylor, I'm still planning sometime in 2025 to take you up on that offer for your couch. That also I heard in another episode you said your couch is quite great. I'm literally kind of planning in the back
I'm
of my head, like I just want to fly, just that we can hang out and just and do that, right?
yeah.
We don't we could record it, but we don't have to. Do you still
No.
enjoy it if nobody heard it? Would you still do it? And I love this
Yeah.
question right now.
Yeah. I think something about it. So I often think like you think about the old philosophers when they talk about like what is reality and everything like that, and you kind of think to yourself like, man, what is the point of wondering about these sort of things? Sometimes I think this, what is the point of thinking? Because my whole thing of like, whether we're real or we're trapped in a eternal sleep by a demon or whatever one of them thought. I thought like that doesn't really matter. I still have to go to work because I need money to, whatever it is, like that sort of thing. But then I can just as happily go down a rabbit hole of like, what is the point of doing art? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I do kind of understand, and I think maybe that is something human in that Aristotle and all that were just sitting around like this. They didn't have microphones, but they were just wondering this kind of thing because it is fun to think about.
But even then, if
Um,
they couldn't go into like, the big chambers and the big stoas of stoicism and all of these things, if they couldn't do that and tell other people their ideas, which is very much what I'm in the middle of doing in my own world right now, if you couldn't, I'll just say a bit about me because I'm now writing way more like that. I've pivoted away from comedy. And I was going to say that, plugs at the end. I'm writing a lot. And right now I'm writing it to myself because I haven't put really any of it out there yet, but I know I've got it. So I was literally questioning just the other day, would I keep writing these blogs, these kind of conversations to myself if I knew I could never publish it? Because right now I'm thinking, I know I'm going to put these out there and I'm going to do it because I want I want to see if it changes people. I want to see if it makes people think. But if I couldn't publish it, how quickly am I going to give up on this idea? And I don't know yet. I'm actively thinking about that every day right now. Comedy is a bit weird because comedy inherently, it's weird.
you
Comedy,
need
like
other people for it to
you
happen.
need it. However, you don't at the same time that just like Fletcher, or not Fletcher, but Andrew, you could write a new joke every day for yourself and it could be for you. You could never say it on, you could never tell anybody in the world, but you could have a great time. To me, the best point of writing comedy was when I was chuckling to myself at home. Like, that's so dumb and funny. I love that I wrote that. And you're happy, but it's almost like I couldn't be 100% happy until I knew that I tested it with somebody. So it's like you could be a
Yeah.
comedian by yourself.
And this is something that it's one of those things where I think I care more about the process than the audience does in this sense, but like there was this Jackie Chan My Stunts documentary where he said he was talking about the idea of repeating stunts that he got wrong, and he goes, "Look, when you do, let's say you can't get a stunt, and you think, oh well, or we got it half-assed," and he thought, yeah, well, it was windy that day, it was raining, I had a sore leg, and he had all these excuses, and he's like, the audience doesn't care. The audience just looks at it and says, good movie, bad movie, and
Yeah.
that's all the thought they put into it. And so this idea, I feel like, is more for me than it is for the audience. But I've been so fascinated with the idea that you could, like, let's say you're releasing a novel. What's different about things like music? I mean, you can play music for people, but like the idea of novels, generally, you write it over the course of a year or two or whatever, and then you release it to the public, and then you find out what people think of it. Whereas with stand-up, you have a pretty good idea at all times how good your act is because you're seeing whether it gets laughs from people. So in that sense, like you can be pretty confident when you release a special that the stuff in it is good because you've been getting that immediate feedback. I've always been fascinated with this idea that I could, in a position where I was more financially stable, especially with sometimes in winter, going out to these open mics that you're running when you've got like 4 people in the audience, I almost think to myself, I'd rather just not do that at times. So I love, at times I love the idea of being able to almost like hibernate, where you just take the winter off and, I go and rent a holiday home up in like Hamner Springs or something, and then just be like do like The Shining, where I shut myself in and just go crazy on a typewriter for 6 weeks or something. And yeah, I've been fascinated with the idea of if I could stop doing mics and just write a new show and then put it on with the idea of like, this was one of those artist retreats that we all fantasize about being able to do, where you lock yourself in a room for 6 months and write the next great American novel. But then at the same time, I also don't know whether the general, like, people will be like, is that the sort of selling point where people will be like, oh, he hasn't tested this material at all? You know what I mean? Like, I think you would need to be a name that people like. You would need to be sort of noteworthy and have that kind of trust of your audience that they go, okay, I've seen him 3 years in a row. He's had a new show each time and it's been good. We'll take a punt on this.
Yeah, I mean, well, first, just on that great artist retreat, man, that is such a peek into my brain right now. Because for the past year, like, again, when we, as you aforementioned ramen briefly, when we did, meet up in the city with Hamish, other friend of the podcast, a while back.
Oh yeah, big friend
like
of the
that's when I
podcast.
was. That was at that point. It was a year after I had visited Japan for the first time, and I was still obsessed. And I'm speaking in the past tense now because I think I'm changing. I was still obsessed with going back to Japan for 3 to 6 months for exactly the same reason, like with my wife, but like going to even a small town and essentially like, I just want to write. I just want to write and be a place to read and write every day and not have the distractions of work and everything else. And all of these ideas are slowly changing into me because I'm like, well, first, if I'm not making that time today, how much do I actually care? Now I'm proving to myself, kind of like that challenge again. If nobody could see it, would you still do it? I am still writing every day right now. One of the reasons I stayed up so late last night, this behind the scenes talk with references that nobody understands, is because at like 2 a.m. I started writing this new blog for myself. It's really rough, but I loved the new idea I got with it. I'm like, see, that's what I want to do every day. I just want to like think and write these things and one day put it out there. And I'm like, and I keep telling myself this fantasy story of how much could I get done if I was by myself for even 3 days, where I got rid of all the distractions. All of the great writers that I know, that's their advice that they always say. They lock themselves in a cabin for 2 weeks and they either can write or nothing. And so they just bang out this new novel that you've heard or whatever it is. And I just realized, kind of like comedy, in your scenario of an hour-long special, right? If you wrote a novel in 2 weeks, because that's all you did, and you lived and breathed that to get it done, just like a comedy hour, that novel would be completely untested, right? So you'd give that manuscript to somebody, and you wouldn't have tried out a chapter here, chapter there, like you would stand up. You would kind of be going at it, and I guess, like you said, either trusting the readers if you just straight up published it, or your publisher to trust that you've at least got something worth reading that manuscript for. But if you're like me and I'm kind of dabbling with a novel right now that I've never been able to write one, but I've got an idea and I started a chapter. If I wrote that, no, I have no credibility as a novel writer. So I would have to put something out there and just kind of hope, because it's like an hour.
Mm.
It's going to take multiple hours to read those things. And so you've got to, but I guess you'll learn within the first 5 minutes, like a stand-up special. Do you want to sit around and watch this guy do it anymore? Or do you want to close the book and walk away?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the thing. Certain books I've started reading that have really gripped me. Like, I feel like the first Jack Reacher book, there have been whole podcasts done about why that opening page of the first Jack Reacher book is like a masterclass in like no fuss, no frills, no fat on it. Huh?
I need to find this. I've never actually read. No, I might have. No, I didn't. Not Jack Reacher. I've never read any of those. So I definitely need to look up what these lines are. Yeah.
Let's see if I have it on my. I can read it to you. I could probably almost do it from memory, but I will read it to you.
This episode, so you can bungle whatever you want to.
Well, this is the part where we're an hour in, so the people that have been listening to this point are reading it at work or something.
Or they're mowing the grass like I do, and you're just like walking around going, well, hey, it's better.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so
while you find it,
here is the first. I'm just getting past all the stuff. Okay, so the first chapter, and you will understand pretty much straight away why this is such a masterclass. So the first chapter, I was arrested in Eno's diner at 12 o'clock. I was eating eggs and drinking coffee. A late breakfast, not lunch. I was wet and tired after a long walk in heavy rain, all the way from the highway to the edge of town. So, like, that's the first paragraph. It goes on to describe the diner. It says the diner was small but bright and clean, brand new, built to resemble a converted railroad car, narrow with a long lunch counter on one side and a kitchen bumped out back, booths lining the opposite wall, a doorway where the centre booth would be. I was in a booth, at a window, reading somebody's abandoned newspaper about the campaign for a president I didn't vote for last time and wasn't going to vote for this time. Outside the rain had stopped, but the glass was still pebbled with bright drops. I saw the police cruisers pull into the gravel lot. They were moving fast and crunched to a stop. Light bars flashing and popping. Red and blue light and the raindrops on my window. Doors burst open, policemen jumped out, 2 from each car, weapons ready. 2 revolvers, 2 shotguns. This was heavy stuff. 1 revolver and 1 shotgun ran to the back. 1 of each rushed the door. So, like, just from the tone, like, just little weird things like a late breakfast, not lunch. It's like, why is that important to this character? And like, it opens with, I was arrested in Eno's diner at 12 o'clock. Then let me talk about all this other stuff that I find probably, like, it's almost like the getting arrested was incident, like, oh, that happened, but let me tell you about this diner.
Yeah, kind of like if one, hey Taylor, I just blew up a house. Hey, by the way, so how are you doing today? It's like, what?
Yeah.
What did you just say? Yeah.
And it's very like, a campaign for a president I didn't vote for last time and wasn't going to vote for this time. And like, there's this sort of apathy to everything that's around the narrator. And even though there's this, for most people, you would be bricking yourself if you're about to be arrested and saw police officers with revolvers and shotguns come bursting into a diner. But, he might as well be like talking about his trip to the grocery store with how casual it is. And so there's all sorts of podcasts and stuff, but like that first page is just like, it really, really grips you quickly. And
then,
it
shows you're calm. It shows like the character's calm about this. He's accepting of what's happened a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. And you see, because then you extrapolate logically and you say, okay, well, so why is he so blasé to being arrested? Is he a police officer? Is he a criminal that's been arrested a whole bunch of times? Is he confident that they've got the wrong person? That's why he's so calm about it. And, your mind just starts working about like why. It's a very good juxtaposition, I suppose. But yeah, so in terms of writing, the first page of Jack Reacher is very well done.
Yeah, I hope that if you ever do the transcript of this show, that doesn't get you blocked or whatever the episode, because it'd be like, oh, it's copying material from another source.
I think at this point, Lee Child, for one, wouldn't be listening to this podcast, but also just based on interviews that I've seen with him, I don't really think he's that precious about his
That's more the
you know,
algorithms too. Yeah.
that's true. Yeah,
Yeah.
the
'Cause the
algorithms would
things
get
that I
me.
don't understand or know how, like when and how they block stuff. But yeah.
Very true. Yeah. So an hour and 15, we've done a hell of a lot of. I think we've covered some good ground on
Yeah.
Whiplash. Is there anything else from the movie that jumps out that you'd like to talk about?
Other than the only thing we didn't actually, you know what? Maybe this is a good one because I was going to mention "good job" was a quote. There's a brief bit, but I don't really have much on that.
Mm.
I think that to end like with one more compelling question, to kind of wrap up the theme of actually remind me what we described. You have a really elegant way of saying the theme for this and now the menu. What are we calling this again?
The cost of greatness.
Cost of greatness. Thank you. Because again, it's that is already a great line. It's just so simple and succinct.
Yeah. But then also we get into, you could almost call it what is greatness or
Yeah.
defining greatness. Do you know what I mean? Like it's what I think is so fascinating about the phrase greatness, because again, the scene where he's breaking up with his girlfriend, I think in her mind, she's kind of going, "What the fuck is the difference between being good and
Yeah.
great? And why can't you be in a relationship and be a good at?" It's like she even says something to. He says, "I want to." The funniest thing is that audio has sort of been TikTok memed. Like it's an audio that people used for a while, and I was listening to it like, "Oh shit, that's what it's from." And he says something about, he kind of lays it out for her, and he basically says, "I want to pursue what I'm pursuing. Um, I'll feel resentful of you for wanting to hang out with me. You'll feel resentful of me for not wanting to hang out with you." And the way she words it, she's just like, "So you want to be great at drumming?" And he's like, "Yeah." And she's like, "And I would stop you from
Yeah.
being great at drumming." And he's like, "Yeah."
Which is
You're just like,
so fair. Like,
yes,
it's like, he knew again what he wanted, and he saw and made that trade off that I'm going to give up all social everything because this is my goal. And again, that part I go commendable again.
Mm. But I also think they're on totally different pages where she doesn't really understand why. I think in her mind, it's like, what the hell am I going to do to stop you from being good at this thing that you love? And it could be the concept of like their definition of greatness is different, where in his mind, he wants to be like, in 10 years, he wants to be a dead musician that people are talking about how amazing he was in coffee shops. And in her mind, maybe great means just, oh, you get to drum every day of the week and you get to play some shows and people like your music. And like, why, there's no reason you couldn't have a partner while living that life,
And they did set her up great for that scene as a juxtaposition, because when you first meet her, he's like, "Oh, so like you're in university?" She's like, "Oh yeah, I picked here. Why that one?" "Oh, just because that's the only one I got into." It's like, "So what are you studying?" "I'm just in like a general major." Like, so they set her up as very much somebody who overtly said she didn't know what she wanted. And so therefore, when you see them too, of like him knowing exactly what he thinks he wants, and then her going, she doesn't know what she wants, then yeah, you get that comparison. And I like it almost to even go, what stops you from that? It's like, well, watching an hour of, and this is where, if I really want to go into it, watching an hour of TV, watching these shows and movies we talked about, that's not going to stop you from greatness, actually. But is it? Because if I could be reading an extra book for that hour, or writing another hour outside, or going for a walk and clearing my brain, isn't in some ways, every time you swipe on social media to some new video, every time you watch something else, every time you say yes to somebody doing something, if I didn't care about this podcast, saying yes to this hour, I could have been outside doing something for me, right? So it's like all of this is that
That's
exact
exactly my
same
plan.
scenario. Yeah.
That's my plan to keep you down, Geoff. I'm going to bog you down with podcasts, and you're never going to achieve everything because you're going to be too busy talking with me about movies that came out 10 years ago.
Yeah. So with that, I think the final thing kind of say is, if this is what he wanted, at what point is abuse okay? Because we've talked so much about abuse, but if this is what he's okay putting up with, then yeah, like, is there, we could say it's so wrong what Fletcher's doing, but if he's willing to do that, this is
Right.
such a moral argument, right? Because again, we touched on relationship abuse and all of these other things, but at what point if you want it, is it okay to take it? To take somebody literally physically hurling things at you and slapping you in the face when you're doing wrong and all of that.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I think you get into such murky waters there because let's say Nyman is consenting to receive all this abuse, but it's so conditional on the fact that he believes it's because he will get a result that he wants at the end. And that's so murky because it's like, I'm reminded of that scene from Wolf of Wall Street when Matthew McConaughey's like, no one, not me, not you, no one knows what a stock's going to do. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
but it's like everything is bullshitting, right? Like it's no one knows nothing for sure. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, and I don't think I have an answer about like when is abuse okay, because you think, okay, well he's willing to go through with it, but I also think he's been sold a dream that maybe is not like is not a sure thing like he seems to believe it is.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those, it's an unanswerable question, but one that I like at least asking myself after this, in that sense of, yeah, like it's a rhetorical question, I guess, but I love that you could have a dialogue. You could sit there and think and write down, like, when are you okay putting up with something if you think, let's say it's work, right? A corporate job, work after hours or do 10 projects when you can only handle 5, like and a billion other versions of that. Like, at what point, if you know that, and you've told yourself, this is what it's going to take for me to get the thing I want, the promotion, the more money, as we talked about, to buy that jet ski or whatever, at what point is it your choice versus something else that somebody's doing wrong? Again, Fletcher got kicked out of school because they said, well, see, he's abusing students. But if the students keep putting up with it, yes, he's an authority figure, and yes, he can kick people out of a band, but and just like it's such this weird area in the middle between authority and choice.
There's a scene in this sitcom called Peep Show where one of the two main characters, he thinks he's a life coach, and he thinks, he's got some fake diploma, and so he thinks he's helping this guy called Big Mad Andy, who's like a tradesman, he's a painter or something, and he's got very, very deep mental problems, and his whole thing is that he gets into fights at the pub, not because he wants to punch people, because he wants to be punched. He feels like he should be punished and that kind of thing. And he has a big breakdown, and he says to Jez, he says, I want you to punch me. I need to be punched. And Mark, the more reasonable to the character, is like, Jez, you can't punch him. And Jez just goes, it's what he wants. And so I feel like that feels a bit like the Fletcher situation where, like, it's not right to do, but it's at the same time, it's like, it's what he wants. Like, and I just think, I think you've raised a great question, because I don't have the answer for it. It doesn't make me feel good to think about it, but I don't know what to do with that kind of situation.
Yeah, I think let's leave people on that then, a mystery of questioning, like, there's some, like, what is that? What is greatness? What is abuse and what is not? This is, man, if people do listen this far, this is going to be one of those, if you want comments, this could be the fire of lots of things if people heard this part of it.
Leave a comment on the Reddit. What do you think? I'll post this episode when it drops on the subreddit. This episode's not going to be out for a while. This will be like January by the time this one drops, by the way. So it's going to be a while.
And this is where then, like, you poke the beehive, and now suddenly, lots of people commenting, what are these two males talking about of abuse, and what do they know? Like, well, that's the point. That's why we just watched the movie, and you got a question after it. It's not encouraging, not encouraging.
I think my from what I've seen of my listeners and the interactions I've had with them, they are very emotionally mature people. So I don't think we're going to get a big flaming for talking about this episode. But I mean, do let me know what you think. Comment on the subreddit. I know 6 of my listeners are in the subreddit. So if any of you 6 are listening,
now, Taylor, when you have achieved whatever you define as greatness, maybe that's when people are listening to the back catalog, and then it's all taken out of context, and then all the things blow up.
True that. Little public service announcement. I do not condone any abusive behavior from teachers towards their students, no matter how much they seem to want it.
The first
You know,
5
even
minutes
if
of
you
this
can,
episode is just going to be disclaimers. There's so many.
it's all going to be taken out of context. Okay, well, let's wrap this up. So, Geoff, I mean, the users all know where to find me, Taylor Ruddle Comedy. By the time this episode drops, my two specials will be out,
Nice.
Classy Comedy and Panic at the Buffet. Go to my YouTube channel and watch those. I'd appreciate that. Geoff, what would you like to plug, my friend?
It's still hard because, like I mentioned,
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of like transitioning to put stuff out there. For now, my social handles are still at Geoff Wilson Comedy. That's GEOFF. I will probably change that soon enough. I'm going to launch a new blog site and all of that. But, it's one of those, if you follow a social handle while I'm not putting anything up right now, I will turn these things back on. And once you follow and you change a name, then you'll just see the new name, whatever that is.
Yeah.
So I will be doing a lot of these kind of thoughts and putting these kind of hard life questions out there for myself. And so if you feel like questioning your sanity, follow along.
Hell yeah. Well, thanks so much for joining me, man. This hour and a half has flown by.
Yeah.
Hope the listeners got something out of it, and go and check out Whiplash, but obviously be aware that there are some distressing content with it.
Do 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 do. I'm just gonna put the soundtrack on now.
Thank you, Geoff.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Ruddle Me This. Don't forget to hit subscribe and leave me a review on your favorite podcast platform. You can find me on social media at Taylor Ruddle Comedy on all the major platforms. You can also join patreon.com/Taylor Ruddle Comedy for free, which gets you access to all sorts of extras and behind the scenes content, as well as allows you to communicate directly with me and let me know what you think of the show. Tune in again next Monday for another episode of Ruddle Me This, and until then, Ruddle her out.
This has been a Tape Deck Media production. Thank you for listening.
Hey Ruddlers, I joined a group of podcasters that we are calling the Trailer Alliance, a group of podcasters that share each other's trailers at the end of the episodes and generally support each other. So at the end of each episode for the next few weeks, I'm going to be playing a trailer of one of the members of the Trailer Alliance. And here's one of them now. I hope you like it.
Are you struggling with a lack of access to captivating entertainment and media? Are you faced with constant judgment and ridicule from friends and family for your inability to respond appropriately to sensitive situations? If this sounds like you might be suffering from being emotionally dead inside. But it's not too late to make a change. One Nothing Podcast is a newly available treatment for being dead inside. Taken just once every 2 weeks, One Nothing could make a world of difference. By combining carefully measured dark humor to the amazing original formula of grisly fatalities, One Nothing Podcast has successfully entertained thousands of people suffering from death inside. And with access across all podcast platforms, treatment has never been more readily available. But don't trust my word. Here's some real-world testimonials from a few of our listeners currently undergoing treatment.
From consistent doses of One Nothing Podcast, my posture has greatly improved due to being kept on the edge of my seat.
The One Nothing Podcast comes on, everybody be like, shut the f*** up. I'll be quiet, but when the episode's over, I'll be talking again.
Oh my gosh, buddy. I used to be on so many medications for blood pressure, and then I listened to One Nothing Podcast's episode on Kitty Genovese, moved into an apartment on my own, and haven't needed it since. That one really got my blood pumping.
You know, listening to One Nothing Podcast, I'm not constipated anymore. I'm just full of shit.
So what's stopping you from great entertainment?
One Nothing Podcast is not intended for all audiences. Listeners under 18 years of age should obtain permission from your parent or guardian before downloading. Tell your therapist if you're predisposed to whining, complaining, reading podcasts poorly, being overall combative, or being easily offended, as One Nothing Podcast might not be right for you.
So stop letting great content pass you by. Talk to your therapist today to see if One Nothing Podcast is right for you.
How to have fun, anytime, anywhere. Step 1. Go to ChumbaCasino.com.
ChumbaCasino.com. got it.
Step 2, collect your welcome bonus.
Come to Papa welcome bonus.
Step 3, play hundreds of casino-style games for free.
That's a lot of games, all for free?
Step 4, unleash your excitement.
Woohoo!
Chumba Casino has been delivering thrills for over a decade. So claim your free welcome bonus now and live the Chumba life. Visit ChumbaCasino.com.
VGW Group. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.